I just want to switch to something that kind of really struck me, and it's not the first time Gianni Infantino has said things like this. He says it regularly. But if for those of us who watched the FIFA Congress, which took place in Vancouver, in fact, uh, he came out and constantly spoke about football uniting the world. This is his big slogan. And he attempted very ham-handedly to bring the Palestinian and Israeli football representatives up on stage to shake hands. And of course, the Palestinian representative was going to have none of that. And then very shortly after that, his address to the Milken Institute's Global Conference in LA, where Infantino said, we have to unite the world. If we don't do it, who will? As if FIFA has somehow become the kind of United Nations of our era or something. So, Miguel, I want to ask you about this. I mean, to me, I'm not in the football world. It sounds kind of ridiculous. How is this perceived within the football world? And now, like, is the kind of fan hyper passions around football in some ways just playing into this notion?
Can I address two questions that Alexander and Simon raised before
Sure.
answering that? And because I think it's interesting examples that confirm both the issue of gender equality in FIFA and the question of the Super League. And on gender equality, I don't resist to tell a story of when I was the chair of the governance committee, and one of the first challenges that we encounter, one of the first conflicts that immediately made me think that maybe I wouldn't survive for long in my position. And it was the first Congress I had to supervise, was the AFC Congress in Goa. And for the first time, a new rule that had been introduced with the reforms following the 2015 scandals was a rule that required that in the elections on each confederation to the FIFA Council, at least one among the representatives to be elected, the members of the FIFA Council to be elected by each confederation, at least one ought to be a woman. That was the rule. And my committee receives this information on how this election was going to take place. And then I realized that they had created what they call, so for example, they had to elect 11 persons to the FIFA Council. And they had created among these 11 something that they call the female position. And all women were candidates to this female position. So they basically transformed at least one woman in not more than one woman. And when I noticed that to them, and I said, look, you're transforming a rule that is supposed to require a minimum female representation into a cap on female representation. I swear this is true. In the meeting that I had with their electoral committee, the initial answer was, well, but that is more than before. That was and this tells you, I mean, by the way, I then said that together with my colleagues, if they will go ahead with the elections like that we will not accept anyone elected under that procedure because it clearly discriminated against women. And the next morning, they canceled the Congress and the elections with me on the front together with Infantino, and claiming that our committee was interfering with their democratic autonomy. So this is just to tell you how the culture is foreign, completely foreign to any idea of gender equality or any female representation. So this is a very good example of how even a rule that was aimed to promote female representation could be transformed into a rule that actually limits the representation of women in a culture such as this. And so I didn't resist to tell this episode because I think it's revealing of the culture of the organization. And then on the Super League, I think it's a good example of saying that the problems is not only with FIFA, is then on how this culture permeates the confederations too. and of the problem of the conflict of interest between being the commercial actor and the regulator at the same time. Because the reason why, and it was, Vivian, it was mostly UEFA that fought against the Super League. There is actually reports that Infantino was sympathetic to the idea of a Super League because he wants to create its own Champions League at the global level to compete with the Champions League of UEFA, and so that there is a conflict between UEFA and FIFA on this because they're competing for the same pot of money, obviously. But naturally, it's a conflict that doesn't come to the fore, is not made public because of that culture of La Familia. These problems are to be treated inside. No one dares to make this conflict public. But the reality is that UEFA itself, they fought the Super League not really because they are against the big clubs, but because the Super League was challenging their main revenue source, that is the Champions League. Their problem with the Super League was not with the model itself, was that they were going to lose the monopoly that they have over the European competitions, club competitions, where most of their money comes from. And the evidence for this is that if we look at the Champions League, it has to a large extent become a Super League. 20 years ago, 50% of the clubs that will reach the final stages of the equivalent of the Champions League or the Champions League were clubs outside the top 5 leagues of Europe. Now only 5% are of those clubs. So the Super League to a large extent is already, the Champions League is already controlled by a small group of clubs. And the additional evidence of this is that UEFA has granted the exclusive representation of all European clubs, small and medium and large, to the European Football Club Association that is absolutely controlled by the biggest clubs of Europe. So UEFA itself is recognizing and empowering the biggest clubs of Europe. Their problem with the Super League was not so much the model, but it was with them no longer being the commercial owners of that competition. This just to say that this problem of governance is one that is not exclusive of FIFA. We find it at the level of the confederations. And what you mentioned regarding Infantino and his claims to bring world peace and solve world problems, I mean, it's just a reflection, I think, is part of the narrative of the organization, of that window dressing, has this global organization for the good of the world. So it's part of their narrative to try to legitimate themselves and continue to benefit from this extreme high level of self-governance and regulatory autonomy on the one hand. And on the other hand, I think it's really an ego. I mean, in an organization where you are subject to no accountability, where you are treated like a king, where you no longer even have elections, you are voted in by acclamation, where the World Cup is awarded by acclamation itself. In an organization such as this, I mean, the person at the top often loses his grip on reality.
This might be a good moment to switch to another issue, which has become, increasingly evident. And you mentioned the Champions League, and of course, in Paris, there's been wild celebrations over PSG's win. But there's also been a lot of criticism. If you read some of the online commentary in French of some people saying, here is a club that is totally financed, funded by an autocratic, Gulf monarchy, and the sponsorship money is vastly greater than any other club, and all the sponsors are basically Qatar entities. Simon, if I can switch to you, and just if you can give us an idea of just how big this issue of Gulf money is becoming within FIFA and within global soccer. We have Saudi that basically locked down the 2034 World Cup with no competitive bid at all. Um, so how important is it?
Yeah, the phase we're in is that football and World Cups also are now the focus is golf money. In a previous phase, it was Russian money. So Russian oligarchs helped pay for these stadiums. Russian taxpayers unwilling to help pay for the stadiums in Russia 2018. Roman Abramovich, the Russian oligarch, made Chelsea European champions with this kind of money. And now you have three Gulf monarchies that care about football. Qatar owns PSG, held the World Cup. United Arab Emirates owns Manchester City, most successful English club of the last decade. Saudi Arabia came to it late, kind of less imaginative royal family, less understanding of where soft power lies today. They copied Qatar. They were jealous of Qatar. They bought Newcastle United, one of the last remaining biggish clubs. And they, as you say, arranged with Infantino that they would get the World Cup 2034 with no counter bid. Australia wanted to bid, but FIFA kind of shortened the time frame for bidding in a way that made it impossible for Australia to do so. I think this phase is going to end because of the Straits of Hormuz crisis, which is going to hurt the Gulf states for a long time. So right now they can't export oil and gas much. But in future, the Europeans, India, Indonesia, Australia are going to say we can't rely on the Gulf for oil and gas because somebody might close the Straits of Hormuz again, even if it opens up. So I think that just like Russia had its phase of pouring money into soccer, the Gulf phase is happening. Saudi and will end. Saudi Arabia is already pulling out of a lot of things it's doing, starting with golf and women's tennis. I think women's tennis. And I think the soccer money is also going to flow much less lavishly than before. So the 2034 Saudi World Cup, I think they will keep it. I think they'll continue to do it because the prestige blow of losing that World Cup will be too much for them. After that, the Gulf phase of kind of dominating soccer finance will end. Also, Saudi Arabia paid ridiculously for this. They put $1 billion into the Club World Cup, which was held in the US last summer, which culminated with Donald Trump celebrating with the winners Chelsea and then pocketing a winner's medal secretly, putting it into his suit pocket. So that again was a Saudi event. Infantino loves that. Infantino lived in Qatar prior to that World Cup. He's very close with the Saudi and Qatari royals, and he's close to whoever has money. But that direction of that money will shift.